Bear me an heir, Beatrice, and I'll grant you the freedom you have begged for." The ruthless Duke of Ravenshire pushed the agreement toward his wife, while his family watched her humiliation in silence. Lady Beatrice looked down at the document. Under its terms, she would remain confined to Ravenshire until she produced a legitimate son. After the child's birth, Alistair would grant her a separate residence, but he would retain custody of the boy, control her dowry, and forbid her from interfering in the management of the estate. He called that freedom. The Dowager Duchess sat beside her son wearing the black silk of permanent mourning. A ruby flashed on one finger as she tapped impatiently against the arm of her chair. "You have demanded a separate life for years," she said. "His Grace is offering one. Surely you are not offended by the condition attached to it." Beatrice raised her eyes to Alistair. 4 years earlier, he had taken her hand before the altar and promised that her father's mercantile origins would never diminish her place beside him. Ravenshire had been near bankruptcy then. Beatrice's dowry had rescued its mills, repaired its tenant farms, and satisfied the creditors who had gathered like crows around the estate. Now the money was secure, and Alistair had decided the woman who brought it was expendable. "What happens if no child is born?" Beatrice asked. "You will leave at the end of 12 months without Hawthorne Cottage or the annual allowance," he replied. "And my dowry, it became part of Ravenshire upon our marriage." "No," Beatrice said quietly. "You merely assumed it did." A flicker of unease crossed the dowager's face. Alistair leaned forward. "Do not turn this into another argument about accounts. It is an agreement concerning property, custody, and my body. What else should we discuss?" His jaw tightened. Sign it. The command might once have frightened her. Tonight, it merely confirmed that the husband she had tried to reach no longer existed. Beatrice lifted the agreement and examined the signature lines. The document had been prepared by Mr. Sloane, the new family solicitor, appointed after her father's former partner died in a supposed carriage accident. Several phrases had been copied from her original marriage settlement, yet one paragraph was missing, the paragraph her father had insisted upon when Ravenshire accepted her £80,000 dowry. If the Duke publicly repudiated his wife, installed another woman in her lawful position, or attempted to retain her trust property after separation, the unentailed mills, farms, and investments purchased with her dowry would pass immediately to trustees acting solely for her benefit. Without those properties, Ravenshire would lose more than half its annual income. Beatrice had never invoked the clause. She had hidden her own duplicate because she hoped Alistair might remember their marriage before legal force became necessary. That hope had ended tonight. "I will require sealing wax," she said. Alistair appeared surprised. "You intend to sign?" "I intend to determine whether this document is genuine." Mr. Sloane opened his case. "I prepared it myself, Your Grace." "Then you will not object to a comparison with the wax used upon my original settlement." The solicitor hesitated. The dowager rang for a servant. "Bring the red sealing wax from the estate office. Let us finish this tiresome performance." When the wax arrived, Beatrice held it near the candle until its surface softened. A faint impression remained from the seal previously pressed into the stick, a raven with 7 feathers on each wing, the private emblem of the Dowager Duchess. Beatrice looked at the ruby ring upon her mother-in-law's hand. Its face was turned inward, but she had seen that same raven stamped upon private invitations and instructions sent to household servants. The wax used to seal her original marriage settlement had been removed from the secure estate office and handled by the dowager. Someone had opened the document. Someone might already know about the protective clause. Before Beatrice could speak, the great hall doors opened. A young woman stood on the threshold, soaked from the rain and trembling beneath a plain brown cloak. In her arms rested a newborn boy, wrapped in a blanket embroidered with the Ravenshire crest. Conversation died around the long table. The woman sank to her knees. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said to Alistair. "I could hide your son no longer." Beatrice felt every gaze move from the infant to her face. Alistair stood so abruptly that his chair struck the floor. "Who are you?" "My name is Anna Mercer. I served at the King's Arms in York last winter. I have never seen you before." The dowager crossed the room before anyone else moved. She folded back the blanket and exposed the infant's dark hair and grey eyes. The Ravenshire colouring. It was an absurd judgment to make of a child, scarcely weeks old, yet several relatives murmured agreement. Anna began to weep. His Grace had been drinking. He may not remember me. I remember where I have slept, Alistair said. His denial sounded convincing, but Beatrice noticed his uncertainty. Alistair had attended York's winter races 9 months earlier. He had returned after 3 nights with no clear account of the final evening. The Dowager took a folded certificate from beneath the blanket. A legitimate heir has not been born, she said, but perhaps Providence has given Ravenshire another solution. Beatrice accepted the paper before Alistair could reach it. The certificate named the child Edward Mercer. It carried the signature of a York parish curate and declared Alistair Ravenshire the acknowledged father. At first glance, it appeared convincing. Then Beatrice examined the dates. The child's birth was recorded as September 14. The curate had signed the certificate on June, more than 3 months before the boy was supposedly born. The ink had faded differently around the numbers. Someone had altered the year and replaced part of the date, but they had neglected to make the signing sequence possible. Beatrice looked at Anna. The woman's tears were real, but terror, not shame, filled her eyes. She was not presenting her own plan. Someone had placed her in that hall and threatened her into repeating a prepared story. Mr. Sloane moved toward Beatrice. That certificate should be held by the family solicitor. She folded it before he could take it. "Why?" she asked. "So you can correct the date before anyone else notices." His face lost color. The Dowager stepped between them. "Give it to me." Beatrice held the certificate against her chest. "This document claims the child was registered before he was born." Silence spread through the hall. Alistair took the paper and read it. For one brief moment, doubt entered his expression. Then his mother spoke. "The woman is exhausted. The curate may have made a clerical error." "A clerical error does not travel backward through time," Beatrice said. Anna suddenly cried out. One of the Dowager's servants had moved behind her and gripped her shoulder. The woman pulled the infant closer, as if afraid he would be taken. Beatrice saw a dark bruise around Anna's wrist. "Who brought you here?" she asked. Anna looked toward the Dowager and immediately lowered her eyes. Before she could answer, Mr. Sloane snatched the certificate from Alistair's hand and held its corner over the nearest candle. Beatrice seized his wrist, but flame had already caught the paper. The servant holding Anna drew a knife beneath his coat. Beatrice saw the blade. So did Anna. With a terrified scream, the young mother thrust the infant into Beatrice's arms. "Protect him," she whispered. "They killed the woman who gave birth to him." The hall erupted. The candles went out. In the darkness, someone dragged Anna toward the side door, while the baby began to cry against Beatrice's chest. Then a man's voice whispered beside her ear, "Sign the Duke's agreement before midnight, or neither you nor the child will live to see morning." The threat vanished beneath the child's cries. Beatrice tightened one arm around the infant and swung the heavy silver candlestick with the other. It struck someone's shoulder. A man cursed. But before she could strike again, the great hall doors opened and torchlight poured across the room. Anna was gone. The side door stood open, rain blowing through it, while Mr. Sloane knelt beside the extinguished candle and crushed the last burning fragment of the birth certificate beneath his shoe. "Seal every entrance," Alistair commanded. "No one leaves Ravenshire." His guards moved at once, but the Dowager remained unnaturally calm. The young woman became frightened and fled. "There is no reason to turn this unfortunate scene into an investigation." "A man drew a knife," Beatrice said. "And someone threatened my wife," Alistair replied. He crossed to her and looked down at the infant. For an instant, something vulnerable appeared in his face. The grief of a man who had wanted a son long enough to mistake desire for evidence. Then suspicion returned. "Give me the child." Beatrice stepped back. "Not until we find Anna. You have no right to keep him. Neither do you. We do not know who his parents are." The baby's blanket carried the Ravenshire crest, but Beatrice noticed the embroidery had been made with cotton thread rather than silk. The household seamstresses never used cotton on ducal linens. Someone outside the estate had copied the emblem from a drawing or an older garment. She moved toward the light and examined the infant's clothes. Beneath the blanket, he wore a linen shirt fastened with a small pewter button shaped like a ship. "That is not from Ravenshire," she said. "It belongs to the Foundling Hospital in London." Mr. Sloane rose too quickly. "Thousands of children wear pewter buttons. Not with this mark." Beatrice turned the button toward the torch. A tiny H had been stamped beneath the ship. Her father had represented merchants who donated cloth to the hospital, and Beatrice had helped reconcile its supply invoices after a clerk diverted money intended for abandoned children. She knew the institution's identifying marks. "This baby did not come from York," she said. "Someone obtained him in London and created a false record connecting him to Alistair." The Dowager's ruby ring flashed as her fingers closed around her fan. "You expect us to believe a merchant's daughter recognizes every button in England. I expect you to explain why a child supposedly born in York is wearing property issued by a London charity." Alistair studied the button. "Can the hospital identify him? Its register should record the date he arrived, the name given to him, and any token left by his mother." Mr. Sloane moved toward the writing desk. "I shall send an inquiry." "No," Beatrice said. "You attempted to burn the only document we possessed. You will send nothing in my name. The certificate was already burning when I took it." "Then why did you crush the part containing the altered date?" His mouth tightened. Alistair looked from Sloane to the charred paper on the floor, but still did not order the solicitor detained. Beatrice felt the familiar pattern returning. Evidence would appear. His pride would resist it, and someone else would provide a comfortable explanation. This time, a child's life depended upon breaking that pattern. "Clara Wynne will carry the inquiry," she said. The Dowager laughed softly. "Your former companion. She was dismissed last month by you, without my consent." Clara had served as Beatrice's secretary and companion since before the marriage. She understood contracts, kept copies of every letter she sent, and remained loyal precisely because she had never benefited from Ravenshire's power. "Clara is staying with her brother in Little Marlow," Beatrice continued. "She can reach London by tomorrow afternoon." "No correspondence leaves this house," Alistair said. "Not until I know who staged this." "Then you have already chosen ignorance." The words struck him. "This is my estate, and this child is not one of your possessions." The infant stirred, his tiny fingers closing around the edge of her bodice. Beatrice felt the anger inside her settle into something colder and more useful. She had endured insults about her birth, watched the Dowager take credit for her reforms, and allowed Alistair to mistake silence for weakness because keeping Ravenshire solvent had once mattered more than winning recognition. But she would not surrender an abandoned child to people manufacturing an heir. "Here is my boundary," she said. "The baby remains with me. No physician selected by your mother will examine him. No document concerning him will pass through Sloane's hands. Clara will contact the Foundling Hospital, or I will present the pewter button to a magistrate myself." Alistair's eyes narrowed. "You are in no position to issue terms. Then arrest me publicly while I am holding the child your family has just claimed as Ravenshire's blood. Explain to your guests why your solicitor burned his birth record and why the only witness vanished through a guarded door." The relatives surrounding them began whispering. Alistair heard them. Reputation accomplished what trust could not. "The child remains with you tonight," he said. "A letter may be sent to Clara, but one of my guards will accompany her. A guard chosen by Captain Webb, not your mother." "Agreed." The Dowager closed her fan with a sharp snap. It was a small victory, but Beatrice understood its value. She had protected the child, restored contact with her most trusted ally, and forced Alistair to acknowledge that his mother's household could not control the inquiry. "I shall take him to my rooms," Beatrice said. "Your former rooms have already been prepared for Lady Lavinia," the Dowager replied. Beatrice stopped. Lavinia was Alistair's widowed cousin, the woman his mother had repeatedly praised as everything a duchess should be. "You installed another woman in my apartments before I signed the separation agreement." Alistair looked genuinely surprised. "I authorized no such thing. The rooms required a suitable mistress," his mother said. Beatrice was expected to move into the northern wing tonight. The missing clause in the original marriage settlement returned to Beatrice with sudden force. If the Duke publicly repudiated her or permitted another woman to occupy her lawful position, the properties purchased with her dowry passed to her trustees. The Dowager had triggered the clause before securing Beatrice's signature on the replacement agreement. That explained the urgency, the forged settlement, and the demand that she sign before midnight. Beatrice turned toward the estate clock. 11 strokes sounded through the hall. They had 1 hour left to replace the valid agreement with the forgery, or Ravenshire's mills and farms would move beyond the Duke's control. A maid hurried through the side door carrying a message. "Your Grace, Lady Lavinia has been found unconscious in the Duchess's bedchamber. There is poison in her wine, and your wife's private seal was discovered beside the glass." Every face turned toward Beatrice. The Dowager's expression filled with carefully measured horror. Alistair looked at the infant in Beatrice's arms, then at the northern corridor. "You knew Lavinia had taken your rooms," he said. "No, but your mother did." Guards appeared behind him. Beatrice understood the trap at last. The false heir had distracted the household while someone planted evidence in her chamber. Now the Dowager could accuse her of trying to murder her replacement, discredit her before the trustees, and force her signature before midnight. The baby shifted against Beatrice's chest. Beneath his blanket, something crackled. She reached into the lining and found a folded strip of cloth covered in a woman's hurried handwriting. The first line contained only 6 words. "Lady Lavinia knows who altered the settlement." Beatrice closed her fingers around the strip of cloth before anyone else could see it. If Lavinia knew who had altered the settlement, then the woman lying unconscious upstairs was not merely her replacement. She was either part of the Dowager's scheme or its newest victim. "Take me to her," Beatrice said. Alistair looked toward the guards. "You will surrender the child first." "To whom? The solicitor who burned his birth record, or the household that allowed his only witness to be abducted?" The baby began crying again. Beatrice gently adjusted the blanket while keeping the hidden message pressed beneath her palm. "If Lavinia drank poison, every minute matters. You may accuse me after we determine whether she will survive." Alistair ordered Captain Webb to accompany them. The Dowager objected that Beatrice might destroy evidence, but her son silenced her with a look and led the way upstairs. The Duchess's apartments had already been transformed. Beatrice's books were stacked inside crates. Her father's portrait leaned face first against the wall. Lavinia's ivory brushes covered the dressing table, and a new gown in Ravenshire blue hung beside the bed. The replacement had not been planned that evening. Someone had begun removing Beatrice's life days earlier. Lavinia lay unconscious across the counterpane. A wineglass rested on the floor beside Beatrice's silver seal, while Dr. Harcourt, the physician selected by the Dowager, held a small mirror beneath the woman's nose. "Her breathing is shallow," he said. "The wine smells of laudanum." Beatrice passed the infant to Clara's former nursery maid, Ruth, who was the only servant in the room she trusted. "Hold him where I can see you." Then she approached the glass. The liquid contained a dark sediment, but no bitter medicinal odor. "Laudanum has a distinct smell," Beatrice said. "This has none." Harcourt frowned. "Perfumed wine may conceal it. Not from someone standing this close." She touched one drop to a white saucer and tilted it toward the candle. Fine purple particles collected along the rim. "This is powdered violet lozenge mixed with a sleeping draught. It creates dramatic sediment, but is unlikely to kill her." The Dowager entered behind them. "Now my daughter-in-law pretends to be a physician." "No, I recognize the lozenges because Lavinia has eaten them after dinner every night since she arrived." Beatrice opened the bedside drawer and found the paper packet she expected. The powder inside matched the residue in the wine. Harcourt examined Lavinia's pupils. Her condition could indeed result from a concentrated sleeping draught rather than laudanum. "Then, wake her," Alistair ordered. The physician requested strong coffee, cold cloths, and smelling salts. While the servants worked, Beatrice examined her silver seal. A thin film of candle grease coated its handle, and the impression on the spilled wax beside the glass lacked the small nick on the left side of the crest. The object was hers, but the imprint had been made with a copy. Someone wanted the household to discover the seal without examining the mark too closely. Beatrice wrapped it in a handkerchief. This was planted after the wine was prepared. Sloane appeared at the doorway. "Or you used a duplicate to distance yourself from the poisoning. Why would I leave the original beside the glass if I owned a duplicate? Criminals often make careless mistakes. So do dishonest solicitors." Beatrice lifted the forged wax impression. "You copied my settlement, but you failed to reproduce the nick in my seal. You made the same error here." Sloane's face remained controlled, yet his gaze moved toward the Dowager. The glance lasted only a heartbeat. Alistair noticed it, but when Beatrice turned to him, he looked away. He had seen a contradiction and chosen not to name it. Lavinia coughed suddenly. Her eyelids fluttered open. "Do not let her touch me," she gasped when she saw Beatrice. The Dowager rushed to the bed. "You are safe now. Tell Alistair what happened." Lavinia pressed one hand to her throat. "Beatrice came here before the banquet. She said I had stolen her place. She poured the wine and told me Ravenshire would belong to neither of us." "That is a lie," Beatrice said. "I had not entered this room since morning." Lavinia began trembling. "She threatened to kill me." Alistair's face hardened. "Beatrice, enough. Ask her what time I came." "Shortly before 9, Lavinia answered. "Which gown was I wearing?" Lavinia hesitated. "The dark green silk." Several guests near the doorway murmured. Beatrice had worn silver throughout the evening. The green gown had remained locked inside a travelling trunk until the Dowager's servants moved her belongings. "You did not see me," Beatrice said. "Someone described a gown found among my clothes and instructed you to name it." Lavinia's frightened gaze flew toward the Dowager. "I was confused from the medicine. Yet, you remembered my exact words." Beatrice approached the bed. "Who gave you the sleeping draught?" "You did. Then why did you hide a message inside the infant's blanket?" Lavinia went completely still. The Dowager's composure fractured for the first time. "What message?" Beatrice removed the cloth, but revealed only its blank outer fold. "It identifies the person who altered my marriage settlement." Sloane took one involuntary step backward. Beatrice saw fear move between him and the Dowager. The message had given her a small victory, without revealing a single name. They did not know how much Lavinia had written, which meant each conspirator now feared the other had been exposed. "Give me the cloth," Alistair said. "Not until Clara arrives and makes a witnessed copy." His expression darkened. "You demand trust while refusing to show me evidence. I showed you the impossible date on the certificate, the hospital button, the copied seal, and Lavinia's false description of my gown. Each time, someone near you supplied a convenient explanation. Evidence is not the problem, Alistair. Your willingness to examine it is." The words landed, but pride again prevented an answer. A cry sounded from the corridor. Ruth stood beside an empty cradle. The nursery window had been forced open, its curtains snapping in the rain. "The child," she stammered. A masked man climbed through the window. "I tried to stop him, but he took the baby." Beatrice ran to the sill. Far below, a rider crossed the east lawn, carrying a bundle beneath his cloak. On the wet carpet lay one small object dropped during the struggle, the infant's pewter ship button. Beatrice picked it up and found a strand of red sealing wax caught inside its broken clasp, the same wax used on her original marriage settlement. The false heir, the altered agreement, and Lavinia's staged poisoning were parts of one design. Whoever possessed the child also possessed the missing document, and now knew Beatrice had become the only person capable of connecting them. Beatrice closed her hand around the pewter button and searched the darkness beyond the window. The rider had taken the eastern path, but no hoofbeats reached the gravel road below. A horse moving at speed should have been audible for several minutes. "He has not left the estate," she said. Captain Webb leaned over the sill. "The trees conceal the lower road, not the sound. He wanted us to believe he was escaping through the eastern gate." Beatrice turned toward Ruth. A bruise was already forming along the maid's cheek. "Did you see the horse?" "Only its saddlecloth, Your Grace. It was dark blue, with silver edging, the same cloth used by the Duke's ceremonial mounts," Alistair said. "Those horses are kept in the western stable." Then the rider crossed the lawn from west to east, so that we would follow him away from the place where he intends to hide the child. Beatrice faced Webb. "Close the eastern gate, but send your men to search the western service buildings, the ice house, the brewery, and the abandoned chapel." The captain looked to Alistair for permission. That single hesitation could cost the infant his life. "Do it," the Duke ordered. Guards rushed down the corridor. The Dowager stepped toward her son. "You are allowing Beatrice to command your men, while Lady Lavinia lies poisoned." "Lavinia is awake," Beatrice said. "The child is defenseless." She followed Webb downstairs, ignoring Alistair's demand that she remain inside. Rain had softened the lawn, leaving a clear trail of hoofprints. The marks curved eastward before circling behind a yew hedge and returning toward the west stable. Beatrice knelt beside one print. A triangular gap appeared along the outer edge. "The horse has lost part of its left rear shoe." Webb called for the stable master, who arrived carrying a lantern. "Only one mount has a broken shoe, Your Grace." The grey gelding, assigned to Mr. Sloane. Alistair turned sharply, but the solicitor had not followed them from Lavinia's chamber. "Find him," the Duke ordered. Beatrice traced the returning hoofprints across the stable yard. They ended near a drainage grate, where rainwater had washed away the softer impressions. 3 buildings stood beyond it. The brewery remained busy despite the banquet. Servants carried barrels through its open doors, making it impossible to hide a crying child. The icehouse was locked from outside, its rusted chain undisturbed. The abandoned chapel appeared empty. Beatrice listened. Beneath the rain came a faint metallic tapping 3 strikes. A pause, then 3 more. It did not come from the chapel. It came from below them. "The old wine tunnel," she said. Ravenshire's western cellars had once connected the chapel to a roadside storage vault, but Alistair's father ordered the passage sealed after part of the roof collapsed. Beatrice knew it remained accessible because she had paid workers to reinforce the estate drains the previous spring. Sloane had approved those invoices. He knew the tunnel existed. Webb found the hidden entrance beneath a loose brewery platform. When his men lifted it, the infant's cries rose from the darkness. Beatrice descended before anyone could stop her. Water covered the first steps, and the air smelled of damp earth and lamp oil. Ahead, a man carried the baby toward a narrow opening in the collapsed wall. "Stop!" Beatrice called. The kidnapper turned. He wore a black cloth across his face and held the child beneath one arm, as though carrying stolen linen. "Come closer, and I drop him into the drain." Beatrice stopped. Webb and Alistair reached the steps behind her, but she warned them back with one hand. "You cannot escape through that opening while carrying him," she said. "The northern end was sealed last spring." The man glanced toward the wall. He had expected an open passage. "Who paid you?" "Move away from the steps. Sloane told you the tunnel reached the road." He lied because he needed someone blamed when the child disappeared. Uncertainty changed the kidnapper's posture. Beatrice continued, before fear could restore his obedience. "If you harm the baby, Sloane will call you a murderer. If you surrender him, Captain Webb heard me promise that you will reach the magistrate alive. You cannot promise that. I can promise to stand between you and anyone who tries to silence you." The child cried again. The man looked toward the blocked exit, then lowered the bundle. Beatrice approached slowly. When the baby was within reach, she took him against her chest. Webb seized the kidnapper, pulling away the mask. He was Martin Pike, a groom dismissed by the Dowager 2 weeks earlier, and quietly rehired through Sloane. "Where is the original settlement?" Beatrice asked. Pike shook his head. "I never saw it. Why was red wax caught inside the child's button?" Mr. Sloane used the button to open a locked document box. He said the little metal edge would leave no tool marks. There was now a witness connecting Sloane to both the infant and the stolen settlement. Beatrice handed the baby to Ruth, only after the maid returned with 2 guards of Webb's choosing. "No one separates you from him again." As they emerged from the tunnel, the Dowager waited with the creditors and several relatives. Before Beatrice could speak, she raised her voice. "My son found the missing infant and captured the kidnapper." Applause broke from the guests. Beatrice stared at her. Alistair had entered the tunnel after Webb and had never touched the child, yet his mother transformed Beatrice's rescue into evidence of ducal courage. "It was Beatrice who found the tunnel," Alistair said, but the Dowager continued as though she had not heard him. "Sadly, we have also discovered that the groom was paid from an account controlled by the duchess." Sloane appeared beside her, holding a small ledger. 3 payments bear Lady Beatrice's private mark. Pike struggled against the guards. "That is false. Mr. Sloane paid me. A criminal will say anything to reduce his sentence," Sloane replied. Beatrice examined the ledger. The entries imitated her handwriting, but the paper contained a watermark used by Ravenshire's new supplier. The dates claimed the payments had been recorded 18 months earlier, 6 months before that paper arrived at the estate. "This forgery was created recently," she said. "The paper did not exist when the first payment was supposedly made." Sloane smiled. "Another convenient fact, known only to you. The stationer's invoices will confirm it. Those records were destroyed in a warehouse fire last month." Pressure closed around her once more. The birth certificate had burned. The child's mother had vanished. Her private seal had been planted beside Lavinia's glass. Now, the only witness supporting her was a confessed kidnapper, carrying forged payments marked with her name. Alistair looked between the ledger and Sloane. "Where is the box Pike claims you opened?" "There was no box." "Then allow Captain Webb to search your office." Sloane's confidence weakened. The Dowager touched her son's sleeve. "Alistair, this has gone far enough. Your wife is manipulating a frightened groom to attack the family solicitor." "A search will settle the question," Beatrice said. "There will either be a document box bearing scratches from the pewter button, or there will not." Alistair now possessed a living witness, an identifiable tool, a false ledger printed on impossible paper, and a precise location where the truth could be tested. Beatrice watched him face the choice he had avoided all evening. Before he could answer, the estate clock began striking 11:30. Sloane glanced toward the solicitor's wing. The Dowager's hand tightened around Alistair's arm. In 30 minutes, the trustees' midnight deadline would pass, allowing them to claim Beatrice had accepted the altered agreement by remaining silent. All Alistair had to do was refuse the search until then. He removed his mother's hand and turned to Captain Webb. "Search Sloane's office. Break down the door if necessary." Sloane's face went white. Then smoke began pouring beneath the office door at the far end of the corridor. Captain Webb drove his shoulder against the office door. The lock broke on the second blow, releasing a wave of smoke into the corridor. Inside, flames climbed the curtains and spread across shelves packed with estate records. Alistair seized a carpet from the wall and threw it over the nearest fire, while servants formed a line from the courtyard pump. Beatrice remained at the threshold, searching through the smoke for the document box Pike had described. A trail of burning lamp oil crossed the floor from Sloane's desk to the locked cabinet. This was not an accidental fire. Someone had poured the oil deliberately, then waited until Alistair ordered the search. "The cabinet!" Beatrice shouted. Webb wrapped his coat around his hands and pulled at its iron handles, but the doors would not open. Sloane appeared behind them, carrying a ring of keys. "Stand aside. The financial records must be saved." Instead of approaching the cabinet, he moved toward the desk. Beatrice saw him reach beneath a pile of burning papers and pull out a folded document sealed with red wax. "Stop him!" She crossed the room, but Sloane thrust the paper into the flames. Beatrice caught his sleeve and dragged him backward. The document fell between them. Its edges burned, yet the center remained intact long enough for her to see her father's signature and the opening lines of the original marriage settlement. Sloane stamped his heel upon it. A worthless draft. Then why destroy it? Beatrice pushed him aside and reached for the paper. The Dowager entered through the smoke and kicked the document beneath the burning desk. A beam cracked above them. Alistair pulled Beatrice away as the ceiling plaster collapsed, burying the settlement beneath fire and timber. "Get out!" he ordered. They retreated into the corridor, while Webb's men dragged Sloane after them. Moments later, the locked cabinet split from the heat. Its contents burned before anyone could reach them. The original settlement, the copied seals, and every estate record stored in Sloane's office appeared to have been destroyed. The clock showed 20 minutes before midnight. Mr. Harland, chairman of Beatrice's trustees, arrived from London as servants fought the remaining flames. He carried a sealed notice and looked disturbed to find the solicitor's wing burning. "I was summoned by an urgent letter bearing the Duke's signature," he said. It stated that Lady Beatrice had attempted to poison Lady Lavinia and intended to invoke her settlement fraudulently. "I sent no such letter," Alistair replied. Harland unfolded the notice. The signature resembled Alistair's, but the wax bore the Dowager's raven rather than the ducal crest. "The trustees must determine whether Lady Beatrice has violated the morality and loyalty provisions of her trust," he said. "If the allegations are formally certified before midnight, her control may be suspended while an inquiry proceeds." The Dowager produced the agreement from the Great Hall. "My son has already decided that his wife must remain under supervision. He need only sign the attached declaration." Beatrice took the document. A new page had been added beneath the bargain demanding an heir. It authorized the Dowager to control Beatrice's dowry properties during the investigation, dismiss her trustees, and negotiate the sale of the mills. "This does not preserve the trust," she said. "It destroys it. Temporarily," Sloane replied, "until your innocence is established by an inquiry managed by the people accusing me." Harland adjusted his spectacles. Without the original settlement, I cannot confirm whether this authority exists. You have your trustee's copy, Beatrice said. His expression became grave. It disappeared from our London vault 3 days ago. The conspiracy extended beyond Ravenshire. Someone had removed every known copy and arranged for the last original to burn minutes before the deadline. The Dowager turned to her son. Sign the declaration. If Beatrice is innocent, she loses nothing permanently. If you refuse, and she sells the trust properties, Ravenshire collapses. I have never attempted to sell them, Beatrice said. She no longer needs to, Sloane replied. Her accomplices can act for her. He presented the forged payment ledger, Lavinia's accusation, and a statement claiming Pike had been hired to abduct the infant so Beatrice could later stage its rescue. Each lie supported the next. Harland looked at Beatrice with painful uncertainty. Until these matters are resolved, the safest course may be temporary suspension. There is nothing safe about giving my property to the woman whose seal appears on the false summons that brought you here. Beatrice turned to Alistair. Search Sloane. Question Pike separately. Preserve the pewter button and examine the oil trail. We have already proved the infant came from London and that the ledger uses paper newer than its dates. You need only delay this declaration until the evidence is verified. If I delay, Alistair said, the trustees may take control of the mills at midnight. That is what the original settlement requires after you allowed Lavinia to occupy my apartments. Understanding crossed his face. You intended to invoke the clause. I intended to secure the independence your agreement pretended to offer. The admission frightened him more than the evidence against Sloane. Beatrice saw it immediately. Alistair could imagine his mother's guilt, his solicitor's fraud, and Lavinia's false testimony. Yet the possibility of losing control of Ravenshire struck at the deepest part of his pride. The Dowager placed a pen in his hand. Protect your inheritance. Beatrice looked at the man she had married. If you sign, you are not merely doubting me. You are giving the person I accused authority over every witness, record, servant, and property capable of proving the truth. Alistair stared at the declaration. This was his final opportunity to pause, investigate, or protect his wife from a process designed by her enemies. Instead, he signed. Red wax fell beneath his name. The Dowager pressed her raven seal into it as the clock began striking midnight. Harland's face tightened, but he accepted the document. Lady Beatrice's authority is suspended pending formal inquiry. The Dowager immediately ordered Webb removed as captain, Pike transferred to Sloane's custody, Clara's letter intercepted, and the infant placed in Lavinia's care. Alistair looked startled by the speed of her commands. The child remains with Beatrice. You surrendered that decision when you signed. Guards loyal to the Dowager moved toward Ruth and the baby. Beatrice stepped between them. Touch either of them, and every guest in this house will hear how Ravenshire manufactures heirs. Alistair ordered the men back, but his mother held up the declaration. Your orders no longer govern the trust household. That was the consequence Beatrice had warned him about. By trying to preserve his power, Alistair had transferred it to the architect of the scheme. Beatrice removed her wedding ring and placed it upon the signed declaration. I will not spend another hour saving our marriage. From this moment, I protect the child, my people, and the truth. You may face what you have done without my help. Before the guards could surround her, Captain Webb drew his sword and opened the courtyard passage. Ruth ran with the infant, while Beatrice followed. Behind them, a bell began ringing from the mill road. A servant entered, shouting that armed creditors had seized the 3 dowry mills under the Dowager's new authority. Their first order was to lock every worker inside until the account books were surrendered. Then a second messenger arrived from Little Marlow. Clara's carriage had been overturned. The driver was dead, and Clara had disappeared, with the only letter capable of proving the infant's origin. Beatrice heard Alistair call her name, but she did not turn back. Webb led her and Ruth through the courtyard passage into the rain, then barred the door behind them. The Dowager controls the gates, he said. We cannot reach the main road. Beatrice looked toward the orange glow rising beyond the western trees. The mills had not yet caught fire, but dozens of lanterns moved around their walls. Take us through the old wine tunnel. Webb glanced at the infant. The passage is partially collapsed. It still reaches the brewery yard, and the lower drain opens beyond the estate boundary. They descended into the same tunnel where the baby had been rescued. Water now ran across the stones, carrying fragments of red wax from Sloane's burned office. Beatrice kept one hand against the wall and the other beneath Ruth's elbow until they reached the blocked northern end. A gap no wider than a coffin remained between the fallen stones and the ceiling. Webb crawled through first. Then Ruth passed him the child. Beatrice followed, tearing her gown across the shoulder. Behind them, guards entered the tunnel. Their lanterns appeared around the bend moments after Webb pulled Beatrice through the gap. "They will reach the drain before we clear it," he warned. Beatrice examined the brickwork. The collapse had exposed an old wooden support, carrying the weight of the passage roof. "Remove that beam after Ruth crosses. It may bury us with them. Then move quickly." Ruth crawled into the drainage opening with the baby. Beatrice followed. Webb struck the support twice with the pommel of his sword before it split. The tunnel collapsed behind him, filling the passage with stone and black water. The Dowager's guards shouted from the other side, but the blockage held. They emerged beyond Ravenshire's western boundary, less than half a mile from the first mill. Nearly 100 workers and their families crowded outside its gates. Armed men stood upon the walls, displaying the declaration bearing Alistair's signature. "By authority of the Duke and the Trust," their leader announced, "the mills have been seized pending an audit. No worker may remove account books, machinery, or finished cloth." They locked the night shift inside, a woman told Beatrice. "My husband says someone has opened the lower water channel. If the wheel turns while the maintenance gate is closed, the main shaft will break." Beatrice looked toward the river. The upper sluice stood fully raised, feeding a violent current toward the mill wheel. The building shook each time the trapped mechanism strained against its brake. If the shaft broke, splintered timber could kill the workers inside and destroy the books the Dowager wanted erased. "They intend to make the seizure look like an accident," she said. Sloane's men did not need to burn another set of records. They could use the mill itself. Beatrice had supervised repairs to the water system after the spring floods and knew the emergency spillway remained beneath the eastern bank. Webb, keep their leader occupied. Ruth, take the child to the workers' cottages. Do not enter any house connected to Ravenshire. She crossed the muddy field before either could object. The armed men shouted for her to stop. Webb drew his sword and challenged their authority loudly enough to draw their attention, while Beatrice slid down the riverbank. Water struck her legs with such force that she nearly fell. She found the spillway chain beneath the reeds, wrapped it around both hands, and pulled. The rusted gate did not move. Workers rushed to help her. Together, they dragged the chain until the emergency channel opened. Water thundered away from the wheel, flooding an empty pasture. The pressure against the mill eased, but smoke had begun rising from the lower machinery room. "Break the doors," Beatrice ordered. The workers seized stones, hammers, and farm tools. The armed guards threatened to fire, yet their own leader hesitated when he saw women and children standing between the weapons and the gates. Webb knocked the declaration from his hand. "That paper authorizes an audit, not murder." The workers broke through and freed the night shift. Beatrice entered the machinery room, where someone had packed oil-soaked cloth around the account cabinet. She smothered the flames with wet wool before they reached the books. Inside the cabinet, she found weekly production records showing that the mills earned nearly twice the income reported to the trust. Sloane had concealed the excess and routed it through companies controlled by the Dowager. The fraudulent figures had made Ravenshire appear dependent upon Beatrice's dowry, while secretly building a private fortune for her mother-in-law. Beatrice removed the current ledger and handed it to a mill foreman whose loyalty had been earned over years, not purchased that night. "Make 3 copies, send 1 to Harland, 1 to the magistrate, and hide the 3rd, somewhere I do not know." Hoofbeats sounded across the bridge. Alistair arrived with 6 guards still loyal to him. The armed men at the gates immediately claimed they had acted upon the Dowager's legal authority. "Release the mills," Alistair ordered. Their leader held up the signed declaration. "Your Grace surrendered operational control of the trust properties. We answer to the Dowager until the inquiry ends." Alistair reached for the paper, but the man stepped back. For the first time in his life, a command bearing the Duke of Ravenshire's voice possessed less force than the signature he had given away. "Arrest them," he told his guards. "On what charge?" Beatrice asked. "They hold a document you signed. Unless you publicly acknowledge that the declaration was obtained through fraud or admit that you signed despite evidence of fraud, the magistrate may consider their seizure lawful." Alistair looked toward the rescued workers, the open spillway, and the oil-blackened account cabinet. The consequences of his choice stood before him in human form. "I was wrong," he said. "Tell them, not me." He faced the workers. "I signed after my wife warned me that the authority would be abused. I chose control over investigation, and my decision placed your lives at risk. The declaration must be challenged before the magistrate. Until then, I cannot honestly promise that my title will protect you." His admission cost him the certainty upon which his authority depended, but it did not restore what he had broken. Beatrice showed him the mill ledger. "Sloane and your mother have hidden income for years. These records can expose the mechanism, but they do not prove who ordered Clara's attack or where she was taken. One of my riders found this near her overturned carriage." Alistair gave her a torn piece of blue ribbon, marked with fresh printer's ink. Beatrice recognized it as the ribbon Clara used to tie official copies. 3 incomplete words had transferred onto the fabric. "Foundling. Ledger. Midnight." "Clara reached the hospital records before she was taken," Beatrice said. "She may have discovered the child's identity." The mill bell rang from the upper tower. One slow stroke was followed by 2 rapid ones, the emergency signal used when a worker was trapped inside the water channels. A boy ran from the riverbank, carrying a sealed message nailed to a broken carriage board. Beatrice opened it. "Bring the infant and the mill ledger to Street Ormond's ruins before dawn. Come without the Duke, or Clara and the child's true mother will be drowned when the tide enters the underground crypt." Beatrice looked east. The storm clouds were thinning, and a grey line had appeared above the horizon. Street Ormond stood beside a tidal river nearly 10 miles away. High water would reach its crypt shortly after sunrise. She had less than 2 hours to rescue the witnesses, and the signature beneath the threat was not Sloane's. It belonged to Lady Lavinia. Beatrice read Lavinia's signature again. The trembling woman in the bedchamber had appeared trapped between guilt and terror, yet the message proved she possessed enough freedom to organize an abduction, or someone was still using her name. "We cannot take the child to Street Ormond's," Alistair said. "If we refuse, Clara and the infant's mother will drown. Then we make Lavinia believe we obeyed." Beatrice asked the mill foreman to bring an empty wool basket. Ruth wrapped folded blankets around a sack of flour until the bundle resembled a sleeping baby, while 3 workers copied the most incriminating pages from the mill ledger. Beatrice placed those copies inside the basket and hid the original beneath the mill's iron foundation plate. "If I do not return," she told the foreman, "deliver the ledger to Harland in the presence of 2 witnesses." The mill had become her first base of action outside Alistair's control. The workers guarded its doors, maintained independent copies of the accounts, and followed Beatrice because she had protected their livelihoods long before she required their help. No declaration bearing the Dowager's seal could manufacture that loyalty. Alistair ordered horses prepared, but Beatrice stopped him before he mounted. "The message says, I must come without you. You cannot expect me to remain here. I expect you to follow my terms. Webb and I will take the basket along the river road. You will approach the ruins from the northern ridge with 2 men, no ducal colours, and no lanterns. You will not enter unless I signal." His mouth tightened at being commanded, but he nodded. "And if you are threatened, you will still wait. A reckless rescue may kill both captives." They rode through the fading storm. As Street Ormond's ruined bell tower appeared above the reeds. Beatrice noticed fresh carriage tracks turning toward the river. One rear wheel left a narrow double impression. It matched the unusual iron rim on Sloane's private carriage. Lavinia might have signed the message, but the solicitor had transported the prisoners. Beatrice and Webb dismounted beneath the broken western wall. "Stay with the horses," she whispered. "If I do not return within 15 minutes, signal Alistair." She carried the basket into the ruins alone. The old chapel roof had collapsed years earlier, exposing cracked pillars to the night sky. A lantern burned beside the altar. Lavinia emerged from behind it, wearing a cloak over her nightdress. "You brought the child? First, let me see Clara and the woman you abducted." "I abducted no one. Your signature invited me here." Lavinia looked at the note and began shaking. "Sloane forced me to copy those words. He threatened to tell the Dowager that I warned you about the settlement. Then the message hidden in the blanket was yours." "Yes. I thought Anna would carry the child directly to you." I did not know Sloane intended to burn the certificate or accuse you of poisoning me. Yet you supported that accusation. Shame lowered Lavinia's eyes. The Dowager promised to pay my late husband's debts if I helped remove you from Ravenshire. When I tried to withdraw, Harcourt gave me the sleeping draft. They told me my younger brother would be imprisoned if I contradicted them. Her guilt was real, but so was her cowardice. Beatrice did not absolve her. Where are the prisoners? Lavinia pointed towards stone steps, descending behind the altar. Inside the crypt. Sloane has the key. What does he want with the baby? The child is the grandson of Elias Ward, the engraver who made the copied seals. Ward discovered that Sloane and the Dowager intended to blame him for the forgeries. He hid the original settlement before they murdered him. His daughter gave birth weeks later and left the infant at the Foundling Hospital with a token revealing where the document was hidden. The pewter ship button was not merely proof of the hospital. Its broken clasp had been shaped to open Ward's private document box. That was why Sloane used it as a tool, and why he had needed the baby brought to Ravenshire. The child's clothing carried the key to the missing settlement. Anna was not his mother, Beatrice said. She was a nurse from the hospital. Lavinia nodded. Clara found Ward's daughter alive in London. Sloane took them both. A door slammed below. Water began rushing beneath the crypt floor. Sloane had opened the tidal gate. Beatrice descended the steps, following the captive's cries through a narrow passage. An iron door blocked the lower chamber. The lock contained a thin horizontal opening shaped like the edge of the ship button. But the original remained with Ruth at the mill. There must be another way, Clara called from inside. Ward designed the lock so the token could open it, but he left a maker's release beneath the lower hinge. Beatrice knelt in the rising water and felt along the corroded iron. Her father had taught her that contract boxes and secure cabinets often contained a hidden release to prevent valuable documents from being permanently trapped if a key broke. She found a movable rivet, pressed it inward, and lifted the door as Webb entered behind her. Together, they dragged it open. Clara stood inside, supporting a weakened young woman, whose face resembled the infant's around the eyes. "Mary Ward," Clara said, "the child's true mother." Water reached their knees and continued rising. Webb carried Mary, while Beatrice helped Clara climb the stairs. They emerged into the chapel as Sloane's men entered through the northern arch. Alistair remained hidden, obeying her order despite seeing the danger. Beatrice set the basket beside the altar, the child and mill ledger, as demanded. Sloane opened it and found only blankets, flour, and copied pages. "Where is the original?" "Beyond your reach." He struck Beatrice across the face. Alistair stepped from the shadows, but she raised one hand, warning him to remain still. "You have lost," she told Sloane. "Mary can identify her father's document box. Clara has examined the Foundling Hospital register. Lavinia knows who forced her to forge the message, and the mill workers possess copies of your accounts." Sloane seized Lavinia and pressed a pistol against her side. "Witnesses are useful only while alive. Killing her before the Duke's men will not save you. I do not need saving. I need time." A whistle sounded from the river. A carriage carrying the Dowager waited beyond the reeds. Sloane pulled Lavinia toward it, while his men blocked the arch. Alistair finally attacked, striking the nearest man and allowing Webb to disarm another. Beatrice led Clara and Mary through the western opening. By the time the guards were subdued, Sloane had escaped with Lavinia. On the chapel floor, Mary found the infant's spare hospital token hidden beneath her collar. Its ship-shaped edge opened a small iron box embedded inside Ward's memorial stone. Within it lay the original marriage settlement, 3 letters from the Dowager ordering the copied seals, and a register of payments to Sloane. Alistair read the letters in silence. They proved his mother had diverted mill profits, manufactured the false heir, and planned to leave Ravenshire insolvent after transferring the trust assets. They also proved that Beatrice had personally covered estate shortages for 4 years without telling him, selling inherited investments to protect his tenants and his name. "You saved everything I accused you of trying to steal," he whispered. "I preserved the estate because its people were innocent. I did not do it to earn your gratitude. How can I repay this? By helping under my conditions, without imagining that justice purchases my return." Alistair accepted the words. Mary wrapped the settlement and letters in oilcloth. while Clara recorded each person who had witnessed the box being opened. For the first time, their proof possessed a clear history no forged explanation could easily destroy. Then a shot rang from the river. Mary fell, blood spreading across her sleeve, and a masked rider tore the oilcloth bundle from her hands. The rider escaped toward Ravenshire before Alistair's guards could reach their horses. Lavinia's discarded cloak lay beside the road, stained with blood, but there was no sign of her body. Sloane had taken both the original proof and the only accomplice willing to testify against the Dowager. Mary's wound was not fatal. The ball had passed through the flesh above her elbow, but blood soaked her sleeve so quickly that Clara had to bind it with a strip torn from her own petticoat. Beatrice helped lower her onto the chapel steps, while Webb searched the reeds for the rider's trail. "The settlement is gone," Alistair said. "So are the Dowager's letters. Then we use the witnesses who saw them opened. My mother will claim we invented their contents. She will, and that claim will become part of the case against her." Beatrice's calm concealed the fear rising inside her. Lavinia had disappeared. The documents had been taken, and Mary's testimony could be attacked as the desperate invention of an unmarried mother trying to reclaim her child. Clara's account of the Foundling Hospital register remained useful, but without the original entry or hospital clerk, it would not defeat a ducal family supported by a solicitor. Webb returned carrying a blood-stained glove. The rider changed horses at the river road. We found 2 sets of tracks, one toward Ravenshire and another toward Little Marlow. Sloane had divided their pursuit. Beatrice could not know whether the proof travelled with the first rider or the second. A bell sounded from the distant village. 4 slow strokes, repeated twice. Clara went pale. The magistrate's emergency summons. Someone has called a public inquiry. A messenger found them minutes later with a proclamation bearing the Dowager's raven seal. Lady Beatrice was accused of conspiracy, attempted poisoning, fraudulent seizure of the mills, and abduction of the supposed Ravenshire heir. The inquiry would begin at 10 that morning in the County Assembly Hall. If she failed to appear, the trustees would permanently transfer her property to the Dowager's control. Sloane had stolen the proof and forced an immediate hearing before they could replace it. By the time they reached Little Marlow, the square was filled with creditors, tenants, journalists, and members of the county families. Posters displayed copies of Beatrice's supposed payments to Pike. Another announced that Clara had murdered her carriage driver and fled to London to falsify hospital records. Ashamed whispers followed Beatrice toward the Assembly Hall. The Dowager had turned every act of resistance into evidence of guilt. Inside, Lady Lavinia stood beside Sloane with a bandage around her forehead. She was alive. "Beatrice attacked me at Street Ormonds," she declared before Beatrice could speak. "She tried to force me to accuse the Dowager and stole papers from a memorial box." Sloane placed the oilcloth bundle on the magistrate's table. When it was opened, it contained not the original settlement and letters, but blank parchment, a pistol bearing Beatrice's initials, and a blood-stained ribbon taken from Clara. The decisive proof had been replaced. The magistrate ordered Beatrice's party searched. The copied mill pages found inside the basket were dismissed because no original ledger had yet arrived from the mills. Worse, the Dowager produced a second marriage settlement bearing Beatrice's father's signature. In this version, the protective clause did not exist, and full control of the dowry passed permanently to Ravenshire upon marriage. Mr. Harland examined it and hesitated. "The signature appears genuine, because Elias Ward copied it from the original," Beatrice said. "Then produced the original. Your solicitor stole it less than 3 hours ago." Laughter came from the Dowager's supporters. Every fact sounded weaker without the objects that authenticated it. The magistrate announced that unless reliable evidence appeared before the end of the hearing, Beatrice's control of the trust would be permanently revoked, and she would be detained for questioning. The Dowager seemed to have won. Alistair stepped before the assembly. "The inquiry cannot proceed as though I played no role in these events." His mother hissed his name, but he continued. "I authorized Lady Lavinia's installation in the household without first confirming my wife's legal position. I demanded an heir in exchange for Beatrice's freedom. When she presented evidence of forgery and abduction, I signed a declaration transferring her authority to the very people she accused." Sloane attempted to interrupt. Alistair raised his voice. "I did so because I feared losing the properties her fortune purchased. That admission may permit the trustees to challenge my management of Ravenshire. It may expose me to actions from my creditors and remove me from every office I hold in this county. Nevertheless, it is the truth. A shocked silence replaced the laughter. The magistrate ordered Alistair's statement recorded. The Duke had publicly sacrificed his reputation and weakened his own claim to the property, but the admission did not prove the Dowager had forged the settlement. Beatrice looked at the false version lying upon the table. Its parchment had been aged, the signature expertly copied, and the seals reproduced. Elias Ward had been a master engraver. If he created it under threat, he would have known that open resistance meant death. He might have hidden an error that appeared accidental, but could later expose the forgery. Beatrice remembered the pewter button, the ship-shaped edge, and the red wax caught in its clasp after Sloane used it to open Ward's box. Why had an engraver designed a lock that could be opened with a hospital token belonging to his grandson? Because the token itself carried a mark only his daughter would recognize. Beatrice asked Mary for the spare button. Under the assembly hall's magnifying lens, she examined the tiny ship. Its mast leaned left, and 7 short lines represented ropes running toward the deck. She then examined the raven seal upon the false settlement. 7 feathers appeared on each wing, precisely matching the Dowager's emblem, but the raven's central feather leaned left at the same angle as the ship's mast. Along its edge ran 7 microscopic lines. Ward had placed his ship mark inside the copied raven. This seal proves only that Elias Ward engraved it, Sloane said, when Beatrice pointed out the symbol. He worked for dozens of families. Then you admit Ward created the seal. Sloane realized the trap and fell silent. Beatrice still needed more. A craftsman's hidden mark connected Ward to the forgery, but it did not establish when the false settlement had been produced. She held the parchment toward the window and saw a faint watermark, a crown above 2 crossed reeds. The same mark appeared on Sloane's recently manufactured ledger, the paper that had not existed when its entries were supposedly written. Beatrice knew the Ravenshire stationer's invoices had burned, but the mills purchased paper from the same supplier. The original production ledger contained the date of the first shipment. Send a rider to the mills, she told Webb. Bring the hidden ledger and 1 unopened packet of the new paper. The Dowager stood abruptly. The mills are trust property. Nothing may be removed. Beatrice heard panic beneath the command. That was the weakness she needed. Then perhaps you can answer without them. You claim this settlement was signed 4 years ago. Tell the magistrate where its paper was purchased. From the Ravenshire stationer, the Dowager replied. Which mill produced it? Beatrice asked. The Westbury Paperworks. Beatrice allowed herself the faintest smile. Westbury had not manufactured legal parchment 4 years earlier. Its paper division opened only 11 months ago, after Beatrice personally approved the mill's conversion. The Dowager had just attached herself to an impossible date. Yet she could still claim confusion unless Beatrice forced her to repeat the lie beside records she could not dismiss. Beatrice requested that the inquiry move to Ravenshire's creditors' meeting at noon, where the mill contracts, supplier packets, and trust books could be examined together. You have already lost, the Dowager said. No, Beatrice replied. I have finally learned which lie you cannot avoid telling twice. The magistrate ordered the inquiry transferred to Ravenshire's Great Hall and placed guards around every person connected to the case. Sloane objected that moving the proceedings would give Beatrice access to estate servants she had already influenced. Then keep me beside the magistrate throughout the journey, she said, but order separate guards for Sloane and the Dowager. No message should pass between them before they answer the same questions. The request was reasonable enough that refusal would appear suspicious. The magistrate agreed. Before leaving Little Marlow, Beatrice instructed Webb to protect Mary, Clara, Pike, and the infant in different carriages. If Sloane's men attacked, they could not silence every witness at once. She also sent the mill foreman a note, ordering him to bring the hidden production ledger inside its locked iron cabinet, rather than remove individual pages. Every transfer would occur before neutral witnesses. By noon, the great hall where Alistair had demanded an heir was crowded with creditors, tenants, mill workers, trustees, and county officials. The agreement he had pushed toward Beatrice still lay upon the side table beside her abandoned wedding ring. The Dowager took her place beneath the Ravenshire crest and presented the conspiracy first. She described Beatrice as a resentful wife who had discovered Alistair's illegitimate son and attempted to destroy the child's claim. According to her account, Beatrice poisoned Lavinia, hired Pike to stage an abduction, forged a protective clause into her marriage settlement, seized the mills, and forced vulnerable witnesses to support her story. Each accusation rested upon a plausible fragment: the planted seal beside Lavinia's glass, the payments in Beatrice's handwriting, the pistol bearing her initials, and the duplicate settlement authenticated by Sloane. She wishes to strip the Duke of his inheritance, the Dowager concluded, because he offered her an honourable separation. Beatrice waited until the murmurs settled. Then she brought forward the infant. Mary stood beside him, pale from blood loss but steady. Clara presented a certified copy of the foundling hospital entry, completed before her carriage was attacked. It recorded the infant under the name Edward Ward, not Edward Mercer, and described the pewter ship token left by his mother. The hospital's assistant registrar, summoned after Clara failed to return, confirmed the entry and identified Anna as a nurse assigned to transport the child to Mary's relatives. "The baby has no blood connection to the Duke of Ravenshire," Beatrice said. "He was brought here because his grandfather, Elias Ward, engraved the seals used to forge my settlement." Sloane claimed Mary had abandoned the child and later invented the story for money. Mary answered by producing the matching half of the hospital token, which had remained around her neck since the birth. When joined with the infant's button, the broken edges aligned perfectly. The first lie collapsed. Beatrice next called Pike. He admitted taking the child through the nursery window, but denied receiving money from her. Sloane placed the payment ledger before the magistrate. "His denial cannot outweigh written proof." "Then let us examine the proof," Beatrice said. The mill foreman unlocked the iron cabinet in full view of the assembly. Inside lay the original production ledger and 3 sealed packets of writing paper bearing the Crown and Reed's watermark. The ledger showed that Ravenshire received its first shipment 11 months earlier. The supposed payments to Pike had been recorded 18 months earlier upon paper that did not yet exist. Sloane's forged evidence became a second impossible document. "Lady Beatrice created the false ledger recently," Sloane insisted. "The accounts remain in her mills." The foreman opened the production book to pages signed by inspectors before the dispute began. One signature belonged to Sloane himself. He had certified the delivery date 6 months earlier. His own hand authenticated the fact that exposed his forgery. The second lie collapsed. Beatrice then placed the settlement, presented by the Dowager, beneath a magnifying lens. Mary identified her father's hidden ship mark inside the Raven seal. Sloane tried to withdraw his earlier admission that Elias Ward had engraved it, but the court recorder read his exact words from the morning inquiry. "An engraver's mark does not prove the document false," the Dowager said. "Ward may have prepared the original seal at the time of the marriage. Then the parchment should be 4 years old," Beatrice replied. The Crown and Reed's watermark appeared when Webb held the settlement against the window. It matched the sealed paper packets delivered 11 months earlier. The Dowager's claim that the material came from Westbury Paperworks could not be true because the company had not produced it until Beatrice converted the mill. "The missing clause was not added to an old agreement," Beatrice said. "The entire agreement was recreated recently on new paper." Harland compared the trustees' surviving correspondence with the wording of the false settlement. One letter, written by Beatrice's father, referred directly to the protective transfer described in paragraph 14. The version offered by the Dowager contained only 13 paragraphs. A clause had not merely been disputed, it had been removed. The third lie collapsed. Sloane attacked before Beatrice could continue. He claimed that even if the settlement had been recopied, it was done only because the original was damaged. He blamed Elias Ward for altering the wording and accused Lavinia of hiring Pike. Lavinia stood beside the Dowager, her hands visibly trembling. "Tell them," Sloane ordered. "Tell them Beatrice threatened you." Lavinia looked at the woman who had paid her husband's debts, at the solicitor who had staged her poisoning, and finally at Beatrice. "Lady Beatrice never entered her chamber before the banquet," she said. "Doctor, Harcourt gave me the sleeping draught." Sloane placed her seal beside the glass, and the Dowager instructed me to name the green gown. The Dowager struck Lavinia across the face. The blow silenced the hall. "Ungrateful coward, you promised no one would die," Lavinia whispered. Then Ward was murdered, Clara's driver was killed, and you ordered Sloane to drown Mary in the crypt. The magistrate ordered the Dowager restrained, but Beatrice raised one hand. Not yet. She must answer one final question while she still believes the settlement is the only original document that survived. She asked Harlan to open her father's oldest letter. Its final page carried a narrow strip of wax beneath his signature. Beatrice had noticed it years ago but assumed it merely reinforced the fold. Now she understood why her father had repeatedly instructed the trustees never to warm the letter near a flame. A mill worker brought a covered lamp. Under controlled heat, the wax softened and separated into two layers. Hidden between them was a translucent sheet covered in reversed writing. Beatrice placed it against the window. The writing became readable from the opposite side. It was not a complete settlement. It was her father's handwritten record of paragraph 14, the names of its witnesses, and the identifying flaw he had ordered Elias Ward to place upon every genuine seal. The magistrate read the first lines aloud, then stopped before revealing the flaw. The false raven carried Ward's hidden ship, Beatrice said, but a commissioned copy and an authentic seal are not the same thing. The genuine marriage seal bears a second mark, known only to my father, Ward, and the two original witnesses. She placed the Dowager's settlement beside the hidden record. Lady Ravenshire, you have insisted this is the seal used at my wedding. Before the court examines my father's instructions, identify the second mark for us. The Dowager stared at the raven impression. She had copied the document, purchased Ward's tools, stolen the trustee's version, and destroyed every original she could find. But she had never known about the final authentication mark. If she guessed, the hidden record would expose her. If she refused, her certainty about the seal would collapse. The magistrate ordered Harlan to unfold the remainder of Beatrice's father's instructions. The paper opened with a soft crack. Every person in the great hall leaned forward as the line describing the genuine mark came into view. Harlan read the hidden instruction aloud. Every genuine seal attached to the settlement shall bear a crescent beneath the raven's right claw, formed by a deliberate break in the engraving. Webb held the Dowager's document beneath the magnifying lens. The raven's claws were perfect. No crescent appeared beneath either one. Harlan then opened his oldest correspondence from Beatrice's father. The wax seal upon that letter carried the same raven used during the marriage negotiations, and beneath its right claw lay a tiny crescent, visible only under enlargement. The settlement, presented by the Dowager, was not an old document altered through error. It was a complete forgery, made with a copied seal, recent paper, and wording designed to remove paragraph 14. The magistrate turned toward Lady Ravenshire. How did you obtain the seal used upon this false agreement? Elias Ward deceived me. A dead engraver did not purchase paper from a mill opened 11 months ago, nor did he place this document in your solicitor's hands. Sloane stepped away from the Dowager. She ordered everything. She said the Duke would lose Ravenshire if Beatrice invoked the clause. And you accepted payment to forge the settlement, manufacture evidence, abduct witnesses, and burn your own office, Beatrice said. Do not mistake obedience for innocence. Sloane glanced toward the doors, but Webb's guards had already closed them. The pressure that had held the conspiracy together finally turned its members against one another. Sloane accused the Dowager of diverting mill profits and financing Elias Ward's murder. The Dowager claimed Sloane exceeded her instructions when Clara's driver was killed and Mary was locked inside the tidal crypt. Lavinia identified the men who had staged her poisoning. Pike described how Sloane used the infant's button to open Ward's document box. Dr. Harcourt, brought under guard from the estate infirmary, admitted preparing Lavinia's sleeping draught and signing a false medical statement. Piece by piece, the full design emerged. The Dowager had resented Beatrice from the day a merchant's daughter entered Ravenshire with enough money to rescue the estate. She wanted Beatrice's fortune but refused to accept that the marriage settlement protected it. When Alistair's impatience for an heir deepened, his mother transformed that wound into a weapon. She persuaded him that Beatrice intended to remain childless until she could abandon the marriage with her wealth intact. The bargain, demanding a son, was intended to humiliate Beatrice, isolate her, and pressure her into signing away paragraph 14. The infant provided a second path. If Alistair accepted the child, the Dowager could present herself as the savior of the succession, place the boy under her control, and declare Beatrice unnecessary. If the false paternity collapsed, the attempted poisoning of Lavinia and the fabricated kidnapping payments would still discredit Beatrice before the trustees. Elias Ward had forged seals under threat, but secretly preserved the original settlement and placed authentication marks within his work. When he tried to reveal the scheme, Sloane arranged his death. Mary hid her child at the Foundling Hospital with the ship token that opened Ward's box. Anna brought the baby to Ravenshire to reach Beatrice, the only person named in Ward's final instructions as trustworthy. "Where is Anna?" Beatrice asked. Silence followed. Sloane looked toward the Dowager. She was taken to an empty lodge on the northern road. Webb sent riders immediately. Anna was found alive before nightfall, locked inside the same lodge where the Dowager intended to imprison Beatrice after obtaining her signature. The criminal consequences were separated according to each person's actions. Sloane was arrested for forgery, abduction, conspiracy, arson, and his role in 2 deaths. The Dowager was removed from control of every trust, household account, and family property, while formal charges were prepared against her. Harcourt lost his position and was detained for drugging Lavinia and falsifying evidence. The men who attacked Clara's carriage and opened the tidal gate were identified through Sloane's payment register. Lavinia confessed publicly to lying about the poisoning because she had eventually testified, warned Beatrice through the infant's blanket, and helped expose the scheme. The magistrate considered her cooperation, but did not erase her responsibility. She surrendered the money used to pay her husband's debts and left Ravenshire under the supervision of her brother's family. Alistair faced a consequence no constable could impose. Before the creditors, tenants, trustees, and relatives who had watched him bargain over his wife's body, he acknowledged every choice that had enabled the conspiracy. Beatrice showed me an impossible date, a copied seal, a false ledger, a living witness, and evidence that my mother controlled the forged documents. I saw each contradiction. I signed the declaration anyway, because I feared losing the properties her fortune purchased. My mother created the scheme, but my pride gave it authority. He renounced the declaration, dismissed every advisor appointed by the Dowager, and surrendered management of the unentailed properties, pending a complete audit. He sold 2 of his private investments to compensate Clara's driver's family, repair the damaged mill, and pay the workers whose lives had been endangered. Ravenshire's creditors removed him from the County Finance Committee, while Harland required independent oversight of the estate for 7 years. Public damage received public correction. Beatrice's ownership was restored before anyone asked what she intended to do about her marriage. Paragraph 14 transferred the 3 mills, 6 tenant farms, Hawthorne House, and the investments purchased with her dowry into a trust controlled by Beatrice and trustees of her choosing. No duke, husband, or dowager could remove them again. She granted mill workers a share of future profits, renewed the tenant leases, and established a fund for abandoned infants in Elias Ward's name. Mary received a protected cottage near Hawthorne House and chose to raise her son there. Anna accepted a position supervising the new children's home, where no infant would ever again be reduced to a tool in an inheritance scheme. When the hall had emptied, Alistair approached the table where the unsigned agreement still rested beside Beatrice's wedding ring. "I asked you to give me an heir in exchange for freedom," he said. "I believed I possessed the right to bargain with both." Beatrice looked at him without anger. Anger had kept her standing through the night, but she no longer needed it to make her decision. "You did not lose me because your mother deceived you. You lost me when you understood that the evidence might be true and signed against me anyway. I know. Do you? I know that exposing her cannot repair what I chose. I know restitution does not purchase forgiveness. And I know our marriage cannot continue merely because I finally became ashamed of the man I was within it." He placed a new separation agreement before her. It contained no condition involving an heir, no claim upon her property, and no restriction upon where she might live. Alistair had already signed it. "Hawthorne House is yours," he said. "Your trust is beyond my control. I will not contest the separation or ask you to return. Whatever future you choose will not depend upon my permission." Beatrice read every line. 4 years earlier, she would have wanted him to fight for her. That afternoon, she understood that the most honest act he could offer was to relinquish the power to demand another chance. She signed. "Will you ever forgive me?" he asked. "Perhaps one day. I will remember you without pain. That is not the same as returning. He accepted the answer. Beatrice lifted her wedding ring from beside the first agreement and placed it in his palm. Then she walked out of the great hall without looking back. 6 months later, Hawthorne House opened its doors to the first 12 children sent from London. Mary's son slept safely in a sunlit nursery. Clara managed Beatrice's correspondence, and the Ravenshire mills operated under transparent accounts, inspected by workers and trustees together. Alistair wrote only when estate matters required her signature. His letters contained no pleas and no promises. Beatrice answered them as an equal, not as a wife waiting to be believed. On the anniversary of the night, he had offered freedom in exchange for an heir. Harland brought the final trust deed to Hawthorne House. Beatrice warmed a stick of red wax above the candle and pressed her father's restored seal into it. Beneath the raven's claw, the tiny crescent appeared, proof that the document belonged to no one's deception. She handed the deed to the trustees, then crossed the hall and opened the nursery doors. The children ran toward her as morning light filled the house. Once, Ravenshire had demanded that she produce one heir before she could be free. Now Beatrice used that freedom to protect futures no aristocratic name had considered valuable.